Within the dystopian setting of 2077, corporations are at the center of both the world economy and its power system, looking to secure their roots in every possible facet of life. In a capitalist-driven location such as Night City, it should come as no surprise that there are infinite opportunities to captivate and control the average person. Whether it be through basic necessities or essential cyberware, the corps control you. So what are you to do when the corps create a world of violence and fear? Well, you turn to yet another corporation for protection, one that's just as feared, if not more. Guards are the most visible manifestation of the Arasaka Corporation. Consequently, they usually make sure their guards are immediately recognizable. While Arasaka is far from the only company to offer itself as security, it certainly is the largest and most reputable. Though, don't conflate that with beating the Lazarus Group's military forces or Militech's equipment production. This fact becomes far more apparent when analyzing the Fourth Corporate War, a conflict that sparked between the Oceanic Corps of Sino and OTEC, yet evolved into a full-scale war between the respective security firms, Arasaka and Militech, despite the initial security contracts being cancelled. So just who and what is Arasaka? How did they form? Why were they able to rise to the top and maintain their position? And just how ingrained are they in Cyberpunk's history? Today, I will be analyzing and breaking down the complete history of Arasaka and their impact. This is the unraveling and truth behind the world's most influential Saibatsu and security firm, the Arasaka Corporation. To understand the beginnings of Arasaka, we go all the way back to the Taisho period of Japan, when Sasai Arasaka founded the corporation in 1915. By the time World War II sparked in 1939, Arasaka had grown their manufacturing facilities enough to take full advantage of the opportunity to forward their wealth and power through the Imperial Army. Sasai was an intelligent man. Despite Japan's strong nationalist pride, he foresaw the defeat of Japan, allowing himself leeway that many others didn't have. He worked to ensure the company's survival with expansion across the globe, far from the reach of post-war leadership. His son, Saburo Arasaka, enlisted in the Imperial Japanese Navy during the war effort. He had quickly rose through the ranks and achieved lieutenant by the age of 23. His unwavering pride and undying loyalty to the Emperor was no doubt ingrained in his soul. In 1942, Saburo would find himself stationed at Rabaul Island, where he would actively participate in routine air escorts of a Japanese G4M bomber. During the course of one such run, Saburo and the accompanying pilots were suddenly engaged by a number of American pilots. Despite the sudden attack, it was clear that he had earned his rank, but even raw skill can only take you so far. Saburo crossed an enemy line of fire in the midst of the air battle. While he wasn't vulnerable enough to be shot down, several bullets had shattered his canopy and left arm. The resulting splinters of perspex and metal lodged themselves into his left eye and skull. He dropped in and out of consciousness during the spiral downward, but managed to use his only functioning arm to pull back, leveling his plane and regaining control, with only 2,000 feet to spare. He was alive, but barely holding on. He patched himself up as best he could and began the long haul back to Rabaul, fully believing that he would die somewhere over the 560 miles of ocean he had to cross. Despite his injuries, Saburo managed to land his plane and even reported to his commander. After delivering his report, he passed out and was transported back to Tokyo. After awakening, he learned that he could never fly again and was medically discharged. He was summarily discharged from service and returned to the Arasaka family compound. This is where Saburo lamented over his injuries and wished he had died a dignified death in battle, rather than face the humiliation of a cripple. It would seem that his survival wasn't luck, but rather it was torment to his very pride and soul. A day did not pass in which he didn't feel severe shame and regret, forced to watch from the sidelines as the Empire suffered more and more defeats. With the country in ruin and most cities destroyed by constant bombings, the Emperor broadcasted the Edict of Surrender and renounced his divinity on August 15, 1945. At this very moment, the once proud Saburo was overwhelmed in a swirl of emotions. He swayed on the edge of life and death, on the verge of seppuku, a form of Japanese ritualistic suicide by disembowelment. It was originally reserved for samurai in their code of honor, but this was also practiced by other Japanese people during the Showa era. particularly officers near the end of World War II, to restore honor for themselves or for their families. In this case, it was both. It was in this moment, under the cherry tree grove of the hospital, that he had a euphoric vision of his destiny, the wisdom of his father's actions, the Arasaka Corporation, that is, and all of its fortune and power was soon to be in his control. Power that, if wielded correctly, could permit a clever man to push Japan back towards a position of power from which it could dominate the world politically and economically. He understood, within this vision, that the children of Amaterasu would prevail, not under the now falsified empire, but instead a new deity, commerce. He envisioned a Japan rising above the humiliation of losing the war and becoming an economic powerhouse. In this realization, Saburo drew the half-inch of his dagger from his abdomen. The vision had saved him. He then returned to his household that very night to manifest what he had seen. He began his pursuit of knowledge, studying all matters of business, politics, economics, and history. Furthering this, he continued his study while attending Todai University, anything to provide him and the power of Arasaka an edge on the competition. In 1960, his father, Sasai, died, allowing Saburo to finally step in as head of the Arasaka Corporation. At this time, however, it was still a relatively small company that had just re-established itself in international commerce. Saburo continued the task of slowly retrieving the capital and resources kept secret during the war by his father. His leadership would continue this way until 1970, with the creation of the Arasaka Security Division, providing specialization in high-quality personnel and corporate manpower, electronic and computer security and protection. From this point on, Arasaka Security would slowly develop a sterling reputation as the most competent company of its type. In 1990, this reputation allowed Arasaka to emerge on the Global 500 list, and by the mid-1990s, Arasaka guards were employed by thousands of powerful individuals and corps around the world, and Arasaka intrusion countermeasures and computer security experts were retained by many others. The security division was now one of Arasaka's three most powerful holdings, equal only to the Arasaka Bank and Arasaka Manufacturing. Saburo's unique dedication to his study, and maybe even thanks to the foresight of his late father, enabled him to foresee the world market collapse of 1994 and the US collapse of 1996. Taking the appropriate steps and, through his shrewd manipulation and investments, made Arasaka one of the few commercial institutions to profit from the crash, allowing it to skyrocket in the following period into one of the largest megacorporations in the world. In 1997, the Arasaka Security saw an opportunity to grow beyond its initial purpose. What was once a security firm began training one of the world's first corporate armies in its move to paramilitary contracting, utilizing the Arasaka Guard and Agent Schooling Facility in the forbidden northern waste of Hokkaido. This would mark a new age of Arasaka, an age of ruthlessness as they destroyed or absorbed as much competition as possible, and buying out any non-competitive companies that were deemed a valuable asset. Arasaka's increasing power allowed it self-control over the government of Japan, an issue that was becoming increasingly problematic by the late 1990s. Saburo had bought out nearly 60% of the politicians composing Japan's national diet, which is their legislation. Due to the growing and common fear amongst other Japanese corporations about Arasaka's government takeover attempt, a group was formed by large and small corporations that united under the Far Asian Co-Prosperity Sphere banner, also referred to as the FACS. This managed to counter Saburo's control of the government following the arrest of many of his politicians. FACS would continue to undermine Arasaka's plans in the upcoming decades. Despite Saburo being one of the wealthiest men in the world, he had not forgotten his original goal that fateful day under the beautiful cherry blossoms. He was still very much the prideful man who aimed to bring Japan to the top of the hierarchy under the pretense of restoring his honor. But when he stepped down from CEO in the early 2000s, his son, Kei Arasaka, became the nominal head of the Arasaka Corporation. While all major decisions and policies were still subject to Saburo's discretion, his legacy now lived through his son. Kei had been groomed for eventual complete control and the realization of Saburo's personal goals. Soon after Kei's introduction as CEO, one of their most valuable assets would be obtained. Arasaka had scraped a contract gunboy after a couple rockets turned him into meatloaf, then made him an offer he couldn't refuse: corporate service in a metal body or death. And this was how Atom Smasher would begin his legend as Arasaka's favorite lapdog. 7 years later, the new cybernetic Atom Smasher had made quite a name for himself. Along the eastern seaboard, he hired out for almost any mission presented to him, as long as it wasn't an obvious suicide or double cross. He did have one stipulation though: collateral damage and civilian casualties are a must. During this time, he had developed a quiet rivalry with Morgan Blackhand, seeing the classic Solo as a threat to his metal is better than meat worldview. Adam had repeatedly tried to challenge him to a face-off, but Morgan simply ignored him at every possible confrontation. Naturally, this snubbing had simply stoked the cyborg's psychopathic rage, but what could he do? In 2013, Arasaka would kidnap Alt Cunningham in order to obtain the Soul Killer program she had allegedly developed. Her input, Johnny Silverhand, didn't take kindly to the kidnapping, or having his guts spilled all over the alleyway in which it took place. So he led a riot at the base of the Night City Arasaka HQ, and managed to kill the CEO of the American branch, Toshiro, though he was unsuccessful in getting Alt Cunningham back, as she had unknowingly been trapped in the Arasaka network and assumed dead. Following this incident, Arasaka's MO would essentially be obtaining, upgrading, and abusing the Soul Killer program. 3 years after, in 2016, the day after 21-year-old Yorinobu graduated from Todai, Saburo brought him into his private chambers at the compound. His father, proud of his accomplishment, explained to him the true nature of the Arasaka Corporation, but Yorinobu was sickened by what his father revealed. Rather than agreeing with his father's vision, as his elder half-brother Kei had, Yorinobu was secretly appalled and chose to stay silent as his father kept speaking. That night, after a celebratory dinner given in his honor, Yorinobu slipped out of the compound and vanished into the Tokyo night. Knowing what went on within the corporation, he hated what his father was trying to accomplish and vowed to stop him, while also wanting to save his sister from being involved. While Arasaka would go on to secure contracts and even political positions in governments around the world, it was only in the year of 2021 that they would suddenly be thrusted into a major conflict that would further fuel their rivalry with the Militech Corporation. In 2021, an oceanic corporation known as IHAG announced bankruptcy. Both Sino and OTEC were looking to acquire the corporation, but each company was too closely matched in buying power for either to get an edge. However, whittling down their opponent's resources and sabotaging their stock acquisition proved ineffective on its own, so Sino hired on Arasaka while OTEC hired Militech. These two were the largest paramilitary corporations in the world, and as a result, had been rivaling for many years on different contractors. You also might be asking, where's the Lazarus Corporation? Well, they purposely chose to stick out of this conflict in hopes that Arasaka and Militech would whittle each other down. So while Sino and OTEC may have been using them as proxy, Arasaka saw this as an opportunity to whittle Militech's resources. The same could be said for Militech's perspective. Despite these sub-goals, this didn't mean either were looking for a direct war when the contracts were signed. In February 22, world governments had begun seizing the isolated properties of OTEC, IHAG, and Sino as tensions rose. This was done as a form of protective custody, but led to direct confrontation between the corps and governmental forces. This was seen as the last straw, so global pressure forced OTEC and Sino to the negotiation table. While a treaty was signed and battles between Sino and OTEC would end, Arasaka and Militech's role in the conflict had grown far beyond their contractual obligations. There had been years of tension between the two, and as a result of multiple quote-unquote accidental damages caused to each other's assets, the war was now personal, which was obvious in hindsight, as Militech CEO Donald Lundy was responsible for antagonizing Arasaka. His temper and arrogance had sparked the continuation of the Fourth Corporate War. On March 6, Arasaka tested the newly completed Soul Killer 2.5 by planting it in the vehicular SmartLink processor of a Militech executive. The program worked perfectly, and interrogation of his captured mind led to an assault on Militech's Night City office. This opened a 3-month period of covert strikes between the two megacorps. During this time, Arasaka had managed to trace the legendary netrunner, Raish Bartmoss, launching a battle to grab Bartmoss from his Conapt before Militech could. When it was clear that Arasaka wouldn't be able to reach him first, they instead dropped a rock from orbit onto his entire building, officially killing Bartmoss. At least, that's the claim. This conflict sparked quickly from a shadow war to a hot war, culminating into a final attack by Militech on August 23, 2023. During which several strike teams were tasked with the destruction of the Reliquary database, the erasure of the Soulkiller program, and just overall handling the enemy forces. During this attack, two shocking discoveries were made: an engram and data file of Yorinobu Arasaka in the storage core of Soulkiller, but more disturbing was what was found in the adjacent room. It appeared to be some sort of cloning facility with a neural uploading system hooked into the Soulkiller storage core, equipment that seemed to be used, with tissue samples labeled Alt Cunningham 02-17-2013 and Yorinobu 09-23-2022, as well as several others. You see, in 2020, Biotechnica scientists Francis Young and Moira Kelly managed to implant a construct personality into a perfectly cloned human body, using a combination of cybernetic and organic technology to hold the implant in the blank brain. The self-aware clone was named Adriana. She was the first fully functional, self-aware, self-viable clone. Adriana wasn't necessarily human, so keep that in mind. She was a construct personality, so essentially a complex AI in human flesh. But what program comes to mind that could fix this issue? One that less imitates, but more copies. That's right, Soulkiller. Soulkiller and this cloning tech combined would produce a form of immortality. And of course, Arasaka wanted to get their hands on this tech. This opportunity presented itself when a group of mercenaries were given the task of transporting Adriana across the entire United States to Francis Young, who had defected from Biotechnica. Arasaka used all of its available resources to intercept this group and cut a deal, allowing their netrunners to extract all needed information on the cloning tech in exchange for letting Adriana and the group go afterward. So yes, that cloning tech found in the Night City HQ is very real, and very much not their own R&D, but it wasn't going to be in their possession much longer. An ongoing data crash and soon-to-be nuclear explosion was about to make sure of that. So the nuke was set, a battle between Morgan Blackhand and Adam Smasher ensued, and the rest of the team extracted as the explosion went off under the two solos. The end of the war saw the death of Kei Arasaka at the hands of Spider Murphy as she pursued destroying all traces of Soulkiller, alongside the destruction of the Arasaka HQ in Night City, initiated by a mini-nuke planted by a Militech operative team to destroy the Reliquary database. President Kress blamed the explosion on Arasaka and further demonized Arasaka to accomplish her own interests. As a planned result, Arasaka's charters to operate in the US were immediately revoked, and its assets either seized or driven offshore. As a result of the Fourth Corporate War, the Japanese government almost experienced a complete breakdown, but barely managed to save face. Arasaka was then reduced to a Japan-only corporation for the next decade. Despite this, Arasaka maintained one of the largest armed forces and held onto a majority of their assets. By 2040, Arasaka had managed to rebuild itself and was slowly gaining back its prior strength. There were even attempts to amend its relations with the NUSA. Note though that the NUSA was practically ran by Militech, and despite being in the wrong for the bombing, wanted to hold its position of superiority on Arasaka. This changed when a media named Trey Santiago exposed the big lie, a deception created by President Kress to blame Arasaka for the 2023 bombing, exposing Militech and the NUSA as the source of the mini-nuke, driving Night City to then realign itself with Arasaka. Despite this success for the Arasaka Corporation, there had been an internal power struggle going on since the 2030s. Secretly, Saburo had been spending most of his time in med tanks designed to regenerate organic tissue, while investing heavily into bioengineering and mind-preserving technology. That would be his answer to eternal life. This, of course, is the reason Saburo had managed to live well into his hundreds. As of the 2040s, there were three major factions struggling to achieve control of a company, hoping that the aging Saburo would eventually hand the crown over to them. Though of course, nearly everyone was unaware at just how hell-bent Saburo was on remaining both alive and in control. The factions are as follows: the Kiji faction, led by Hanako, the only daughter to Saburo. It was basically a continuation of the main line. Saburo-controlled regime, but Hanako was more interested in her netrunning experiments than in gaining power. The Mikoshi faction is mostly trying to maintain the corporation according to Saburo Arasaka's sweeping vision. As a highly skilled netrunner, Hanako was one of the few who grasped the true meaning of Alt Cunningham's work. She particularly worked on a revised version of Soulkiller, with the aim of transferring engrams into clone bodies. In contrast, previous versions of Soulkiller were warped by Arasaka to be used as weapons. This later became the Secure Your Soul program. The Taka faction, led by Yorinobu, Saburo's second son. Yorinobu remained the rebel who opposes the other factions to his own ends. Thought to have been soul-killed by his elder brother Kei, it turned out that the person who ended up under the probes was a body double. Yorinobu made sure that during the Fourth Corporate War, he was impossible to find for this very reason. He found himself in this position after the death of Kei, in which Hanako helped Yorinobu be accepted back into the family. But as long as his father, Saburo, or the Kiji faction are in control, he will still be out there trying to bring about its fall, albeit at a different angle than previously. And then, the Hato faction, centered on Michiko Arasaka, Kei's only daughter and Saburo's granddaughter. This faction allied itself behind the American-born Arasaka, although in truth the youngest member of the clan wants nothing to do with her family. But as a figurehead, the Hato faction considers her a valuable asset that will provide them legitimacy should they take command. Not to mention, her involvement is likely more the doing of the NUSA, who she colluded with after the Fourth Corporate War to keep her US citizenship. Sometime in the late 2060s, Arasaka had begun taking interest in the pre-data crash net and the knowledge that was lost within, not to mention the extremely dangerous and intelligent rogue AI that, if controlled, could become a weapon of mass destruction, placing one corp above all others. So launched one of many initiatives. Arasaka was hand-selecting children from a proficiency test to train at an undisclosed Arasaka facility as netrunners, being led on by the dream of serving the world's most powerful megacorp. One of those 12 children was, of course, Lucy from Maine's Edgerunner group. When their training concluded, they were moved underground to participate in deep dives into the pre-data crash net. As they dove into the net, they were susceptible to old-world demons and rogue AIs. The children were picked off one by one, and it didn't take long until only a handful of them were left. After realizing that they could pursue other dreams instead of being enslaved by the corporation, the remaining children, including Lucy, used their net-running skills to overwhelm the Arasaka staff and escape. During this attempt though, most of the children were shot down one by one, and only Lucy managed to survive. Despite its failed attempts with the NUSA, Arasaka would find its opportunity to re-enter North America. During the Unification War in 2069 to 2070, between the NUSA and the Free States, Arasaka would secretly support many of the Free States, including Night City. Then City Councilman Lucius Rhine even requested for Arasaka to return to Night City out of fear of invasion. Arasaka managed to arrive in fashion with their supercarrier in Coronado Bay, just as the NUSA troops were ready for the invasion. The troops were ordered to retreat in fear of the already unstable NUSA collapsing due to another conflict, allowing Arasaka to once again be welcomed to America with an American HQ in Night City. This ushered in a new era of corporate power and influence throughout the city. While it gave a second win from the time of Red, the dominating power of a corporation like Arasaka squeezes the life out of the city, citizens, and competition. With the establishment of the Arasaka waterfront, the majority of competition in the area was destroyed. In the early 2070s, Saburo Arasaka realized that it was only a matter of time before his body would give out. He hadn't yet completed his goal of world domination and holstering Japan to the top. He was looking for routes of escape to squeeze as much life as possible for himself. So he appointed a bioengineer named Anders Hellman as director of the Relic Project. Using the Soulkiller source code, Hellman was able to piece together a new technology that was capable of communicating with personality constructs. There was, however, a second version of this biochip kept under wraps, personally commissioned and supervised by Saburo himself. It was meant to install and activate the engram in a new organic body. In short, a person who copied their mind in a Relic 2.0 and then died could be restored to life in a new body using the chip, effectively granting them immortality. In the year of 2076, a fixer named Faraday set up a plan to impress his new superiors at Arasaka, a plan to make use of the highly desired edgerunner David Martinez, a merc that despite his young age had a high tolerance for cyberware and therefore would be more than useful for both testing and as a soldier. Faraday had tasked David with retrieving inventory from an Arasaka convoy holding an experimental cyber skeleton, while also leaking this information to the Militech Corporation. His plan was to lure David into allowing Arasaka to conduct a field test to obtain valuable data. In the middle of David's mission, Militech arrived with what could only be called an army. This outside resistance, alongside a fake call from Lucy while she was being held hostage, encouraged David to don the prototype cyber skeleton in the midst of his cyber psychosis. David managed to dispatch the entire Militech force with ease, going above and beyond the initial expectations. So much so, no one was prepared when he directed his crew to Arasaka Tower as part of his plan to rescue Lucy. Arriving by shuttle at the tower, Faraday would meet with Douglas, who expressed displeasure at the events unfolding, as the cyberpsychotic David had caused unpredictable damage to Arasaka. As they argued, David arrived at the tower and used the anti-grav weapons of the cyberskeleton to cripple Faraday. David was about to kill Douglas as well, but all of Arasaka was lucky for the presence of one solo that day. Adam Smasher intervened. David managed to flee the tower with Lucy, with Smasher inadvertently killing Faraday in the process while pursuing. David continued to slip in and out of sanity until Lucy kissed him, causing David to briefly return to his senses in his desire to see her escape their circumstances and to achieve her dream of making it to the moon. Lucy expressed her sadness at the situation as they fell, with the couple being aware that David would not survive. David and Lucy would descend to the bottom of Arasaka Tower and reunite briefly with Falco and Rebecca. David would speak privately with Falco and implore him to see to Lucy's safety. The team was interrupted by Smasher, who crushed Rebecca, knocked Falco to the side, and tanked Lucy's hacks, before resuming his battle with David. David managed to distract Smasher long enough for Falco and Lucy to escape. Smasher, directing all his attention at David, ripped his cyber skeleton apart with simple brute strength. Before dealing the final blow, Smasher pondered that David could make an interesting construct, a comment that David dismissed. He was then executed with a shot to the head by Smasher, content in knowing that Lucy would be able to fulfill her dream. This was likely also a somewhat of a mercy kill for Adam Smasher, respecting David's strength in battle to not allow him to be turned into an engram. Who would have thought? In 2077, Militech operatives discovered a mass driver under a legal operation on the moon, owned by yours truly, Arasaka. The ESA was the only organization allowed to operate and own these mass drivers, so Militech tipped off the ESA Council in order to impact Arasaka. This ended up backfiring. In fear of the Japan branch, Arthur Jenkins ordered that the members of the council be flatlined to cover his tracks. This got him executed by Arasaka. Tough luck. After multiple Relic 1.0 failures, Anders Hellman decided to try out the 2.0 experimental version due to pressure from Yorinobu Arasaka and his investors. With a long list of VIP engrams ready to be used due to Soulkiller being used in secret, Hellman decided to put Johnny Silverhand's engram on the new version of the Relic, due to the belief that the experimental version would fail and would destroy an undesirable engram like Silverhand. In Tokyo, Arasaka finally introduced its Relic project to the world, advertised as a means for buyers to preserve a copy of their personalities for future generations to interact with. The tech was extremely expensive and exclusive to the 1% who could afford it. Saburo continued serving as Arasaka's CEO up until his death at the hands of Yorinobu. His death was covered up as an assassination through poisoning, while Yorinobu became the new CEO. Not everyone within the corporation necessarily agreed with his leadership, so many were considering backing Hanako instead. During this time, tensions between Arasaka and Militech were rising, mirroring the conflict of the Fourth Corporate War. Ongoing corporate sabotage could possibly lead to another war, a fear that many shared, and is reasonable in the face of the President's shuttle being shot down and Militech's movement into Dogtown. After Yorinobu successfully rescued his sister Hanako, an emergency meeting for the Arasaka Supervisor Board in Night City was called. Top executives from Tokyo, Paris, Shanghai, and more all met in Arasaka Tower of the American Division HQ. Yorinobu had a plan for a military coup that would give him and those loyal to his faction complete control of the Arasaka Corporation. Yorinobu, despite now being CEO, had never changed his goals or outlook. He had always been the rebellious Arasaka that wished to take the company to the ground. However, everything past this point is left up to you to decide. Our choices heavily impact the outcome of the Arasaka Corporation. The devil ending brings Saburo back to the helm of the corporation, while several will either see the complete collapse or at least withering of Arasaka. But what is the truth behind it all? Whether it is destroyed, hurt, or thriving is a story for another place and another time, another sourcebook or sequel game. Until then, chooms, this has been the complete story and lore behind the influential and evil Arasaka Corporation. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed and learned something new to expand your knowledge of the Cyberpunk universe. Leave all your thoughts and feedback down below so I can learn from you as well. As always, thank you to all the channel members up on screen. I appreciate all your support, even when life gets busy and I can't upload as actively as I wish. I'm lucky in general to have viewers like you all. So, make sure to have a great week, and I will see you later, chooms.